At 2:47 p.m. on a gray October afternoon, attorney Margaret Chen cleared her throat and spoke three words that turned my family's world upside down. Primary beneficiary is... The silence that followed was so complete you could hear my aunt's pearls raw, tealing as her hands shook. 23 family members had gathered in that mahogany-paneled conference room, all expecting to hear my cousin Brandon's name. Instead, they were about to learn that the family disappointment they'd mocked for 32 years had been quietly building an empire that would make their inheritance look like pocket change. Where are you watching from right now? If you've ever been written off by people who should have believed in you, this story's about the moment when assumptions meet reality. My name is Catherine Walsh. I'm 32 years old, and I've spent the last decade letting my family believe I was a struggling freelance graphic designer living paycheck to paycheck in a studio apartment. What they didn't know is that I'd been using that struggling designer cover story to hide the fact that I'd built a digital marketing empire worth $47 billion. But let me take you back to where this story really begins. To the family dynamics that made me disappear from their radar while I built something they couldn't imagine. The Walsh family operated like a small corporation, with my grandfather Patrick Walsh as the undisputed CEO. He'd immigrated from Ireland in 1952 with nothing but a work ethic and a dream, eventually building Walsh Construction into a $200 million operation that employed half our extended family. Every Sunday dinner at his Beacon Hill mansion was part family gathering, part board meeting, where he'd hold court and dispense wisdom about business, success, and which grandchildren were worthy of carrying on his legacy. My cousin Brandon, 34, was the obvious heir apparent. MBA from Harvard Business School, vice president of operations at Walsh Construction, married to the daughter of another construction dynasty. Brandon had the look, the credentials, and most importantly, Grandpa's approval. He lived in a $2.30 million townhouse in Back Bay, drove a Porsche 911, and spoke fluent corporate finance. Then there was the rest of the approved family circle, my brother Sean, who joined the company as a project manager after his business degree from Boston College, my cousin Michael, who handled legal affairs with his law degree from Northeastern, and my sis, Taryn-in-law Karen, who managed the company's charitable foundation and social events. And then there was me. I'd graduated from Rhode Island School of Design with a degree in graphic design, which was apparently the equivalent of majoring in disappointment according to my family's standards. While Brandon talked about quarterly earnings and market expansion, I talked about color theory and user experience design. While he networked at country club events, I worked on what they assumed were small-time freelance projects. Catherine's very creative became Mom's standard response when relatives asked about my career. The word creative delivered with the same tone people use to describe a rash, technically accurate, but deeply unfortunate. The breaking point came during Grandpa's 80th birthday party 3 years ago, held at the Union Club with 200 guests from Boston's construction and political elite. I'd arrived in my best dress, a $200 number from Nordstrom that I thought looked professional and appropriate. Brandon was holding court near the bar, fresh from closing a $50 million government contract, surrounded by family members and industry executives who hung on his every word about market trends and regulatory challenges. "Catherine, sweetie," Grandpa called out as I approached the group, his voice carrying that particular mix of affection and dismissal I'd known my entire life. "Come tell everyone about your little art projects." The group turned to look at me with polite interest, the kind of attention adults give to children's finger paintings. "I do digital marketing consulting for technology companies," I said, trying to sound confident despite feeling like I was shrinking under their collective gaze. "Digital marketing," repeated Uncle Tom with barely concealed amusement. "That sounds very modern. It's actually a growing field," I started, but Grandpa waved his hand dismissively. "Catherine, honey, you're 32 years old. Don't you think it's time to get serious about your future? Brandon here just landed us the biggest contract in company history. That's real accomplishment. That's building something that lasts." He turned to address the wider group, his voice carrying across the room. "My granddaughter thinks she can make a living playing with computers. I keep telling her there's always a place for her at Walsh Construction. Administrative work, maybe handling the office systems. Something appropriate for someone with her artistic temperament. The laughter that followed was polite, but pointed. I stood there in my $200 dress, feeling like a child who'd wandered into a grown-up conversation. "Actually, Grandpa, my consulting work pays quite well." "I'm sure it does, dear," he interrupted, patting my shoulder with patronizing affection. But let's be realistic about long-term prospects. Brandon, tell everyone about the upcoming municipal project. And just like that, I was dismissed. The conversation flowed around me as if I'd never been there, moving to topics of real importance: construction contracts, political connections, and the serious business of building generational wealth. I excused myself and spent the rest of the party at a corner table, watching my family celebrate achievements they understood while completely ignoring the one they didn't. What they didn't know, what none of them knew, was that 3 months earlier, I'd sold my first digital marketing agency for $820 million. The little art projects they mocked had grown into a company that helped technology startups scale their customer acquisition, and venture capital firms had been calling with acquisition offers for over a year. But I wasn't ready to reveal that success yet. I had bigger plans. The next morning, I called my attorney and financial advisor for a meeting that would change everything. "Catherine, congratulations again on the acquisition," said David Kim, who'd been handling my legal work since I'd incorporated my first business 5 years earlier. "What's your next move?" "I want to start buying companies. Specifically, construction-related businesses that complement what my family doesn't know they need." My financial advisor, Lisa Martinez, pulled up her portfolio analysis. "With your liquidity from the sale plus your ongoing revenue from the consulting contracts you retained, you're looking at approximately $12 million in investable capital. What kind of companies are you thinking about?" "Walsh Construction dominates traditional commercial building, but they're completely behind on technology integration. Smart building systems, environmental monitoring, energy efficiency consulting, sustainable construction materials. They're missing entire markets because they don't understand them." David leaned forward. "You want to buy the companies that could modernize your grandfather's business? I want to buy the companies that represent the future of construction, then build a holding company that makes Walsh Construction's traditional model look obey." Solely. Over the next 18 months, I systematically acquired 7 companies. A smart building technology firm for $3.20 million, an environmental consulting company for $2.80 million, a sustainable materials manufacturer for $4.10 million, and 4 smaller firms that specialized in energy efficiency, construction automation, green building certification, and regulatory compliance. I structured everything through Walsh Future Holdings, a name that was subtle enough to avoid immediate family recognition, but pointed enough that they'd understand the message when the time came. By year 2, my holding company was generating $31 in annual revenue. By year 3, we were at $47 and growing by 35% annually. Major construction firms were hiring us as consultants, municipalities were requiring our environmental certifications, and architectural firms were specifying our smart building technologies. Walsh Construction, meanwhile, was struggling to adapt to new environmental regulations and losing contracts to competitors who offered integrated technology solutions. The beautiful irony was that their creative granddaughter had quietly built the exact expertise they needed to survive in a changing market. But I still wasn't ready to reveal my hand. I was waiting for the perfect moment. That moment came with Grandpa's death last month. Patrick Walsh had lived to 93, sharp and opinionated until the end. He'd spent his final years watching Walsh Construction struggle with new market demands while continuing to dismiss technology and environmental concerns as passing fads. His funeral filled St. Joseph's Church with 500 mourners representing 3 generations of Boston's construction, political, and social elite. I attended in a simple black dress, playing my role as the quiet granddaughter who'd never quite measured up to the family's expectations. The will reading was scheduled for 2 weeks after the funeral, giving the family time to grieve and speculate about inheritance distributions. Everyone assumed the bulk of Grandpa's $89 billion estate would go to Brandon, with smaller portions distributed among the other contributing family members. I was expected to receive something token, maybe $50,000 and some sentimental items, enough to acknowledge the relationship but not enough to suggest I was considered a real heir. The speculation was constant at family gatherings during those 2 weeks. Brandon tried to be modest about his expected inheritance, but his wife Sarah had already started planning renovations to their townhouse and looking at vacation properties in Nantucket. Sean and Michael discussed how their portions might allow them to expand their roles in the company. "I'm sure Grandpa left Catherine something appropriate," Mom said during one family dinner. Maybe enough to help her get serious about her career finally. They had no idea that while they were speculating about inheriting portions of Grandpa's wealth, his disappointing granddaughter was running a company worth more than half his entire estate. The will reading was held at the law offices of Preston, Chen and Associates, the same firm that had handled Walsh family legal matters for 30 years. 23 family members gathered in the main conference room, a mahogany-paneled space with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Boston Harbor. Attorney Margaret Chen, no relation to my lawyer David Kim, had known our family for decades. She was professional, thorough, and completely unaware of what was about to unfold. Before we begin, Margaret announced to the room, I want to clarify that Patrick Walsh's will contains several provisions that may surprise some of you. He was very specific about his intentions and reasoning. Brandon sat at the head of the long table, flanked by his wife and parents. Sean and Michael occupied the seats closest to him, with their wives and children arranged in order of family hierarchy. Mom and Dad sat in the middle section with the other aunts and uncles. I had chosen a seat near the back, beside my cousin Jennifer, who'd always been kind to me despite working in Walsh Construction's accounting department. Margaret began reading the standard opening language about sound mind and legal capacity, then moved to the specific bequests. Small gifts to longtime employees, charitable donations to local organizations, sentimental items distributed among family members. Now we come to the primary distribution of assets, Margaret said, adjusting her reading glasses. Patrick Walsh was very clear about his reasoning, so I'll read his exact words. She cleared her throat and began, I have watched my family and my business for 93 years. I built Walsh Construction with my hands and my determination, but I know that businesses must evolve or die. The construction industry is changing in ways that require new thinking, new skills, and new approaches. Brandon nodded approvingly, confident that this preamble was leading to his coronation as heir to the Walsh Empire. I have observed my grandchildren carefully, Margaret continued reading. Brandon has been an excellent steward of traditional practices. Sean has shown dedication to project management. Michael has handled our legal needs competently. The family members exchanged satisfied glances. This was proceeding exactly as expected. However, Margaret's voice grew stronger as she read the next section. I have also observed that the grandchild with the vision and skills necessary to lead construction into the next century is the one this family has consistently underestimated. A ripple of confusion passed through the room. Brandon's confident smile faltered slightly. Margaret looked up from the will and directly at me before continuing. Catherine Walsh has spent the past 5 years building exactly the kind of innovative business that represents the future of our industry. She has done this without family support, without family connections, and without family recognition. She has proven that she can create value and lead others through her own determination and vision. The room had gone completely silent. Every eye was now focused on me, confusion and growing alarm evident on their faces. Therefore, Margaret continued, her voice clear and steady, the primary beneficiary is Catherine Walsh. The 3 words that changed everything. Primary beneficiary is. The silence that followed was deafening. Brandon's face went white, then red, then white again. His wife Sarah made a small choking sound. My mother's hand flew to her mouth in shock. I'm sorry, Brandon said, his voice barely above a whisper. Did you say Catherine is the primary beneficiary? That's correct, Margaret replied calmly. Catherine Walsh inherits controlling interest in Walsh Construction, the family properties, and 73% of Patrick Walsh's liquid assets, totaling approximately $65 million. The room erupted. Multiple family members started talking at once, their voices overlapping in a chaos of shock, confusion, and rising anger. That's impossible, Sean shouted. She doesn't even work for the company. There must be some mistake, Brandon's father Uncle Robert protested. Catherine has no business experience. She can't run a construction company, Michael added. She's a graphic designer. Margaret raised her hand for silence. There's more. Patrick Walsh also included a letter explaining his decision. Would you like me to read it? Yes, I said quietly, speaking for the first time since the reading began. Please read it. Margaret pulled out a sealed envelope, opened it carefully, and began to read in Grandpa's distinctive voice. To my family. If you are shocked by this decision, it's because you never bothered to learn who Catherine Real is or what she's accomplished. While you were assuming she was struggling with freelance design work, she built and sold a technology company for $8 million. While you were dismissing her career as unrealistic, she was acquiring businesses that represent the future of construction. The gasps around the room were audible. Brandon looked like he might be sick. Currently owns Walsh Future Holdings, a company worth $47 million that specializes in exactly the kind of innovative construction technologies that Walsh Construction needs to survive. She employs over 200 people and generates more annual revenue than some of our competitors. Uncle Tom's jaw had literally dropped open. Aunt Mary was staring at me as if I'd grown a second head. I am giving Catherine control of Walsh Construction not as charity, but because she has already proven she can build and lead businesses better than anyone else in this family. She is the only one of my grandchildren who has created something from nothing, who understands both traditional construction and future technologies, and who has the vision to guide our family business into its next century. Margaret folded the letter and looked around the room at 22 shocked faces and one carefully composed one. The letter concludes, "Catherine, I am proud of what you have built, and I apologize for not recognizing it sooner. This family and this business need your leadership. Don't let them convince you otherwise." The silence that followed was broken by Brandon's wife Sarah, who started crying. Not gentle tears, ugly, angry sobs of disappointment and financial panic. "This is insane," Brandon said, his voice shaking. "Catherine, you can't possibly want to run a construction company. You hate everything about our family business." I stood up slowly, feeling the weight of 23 pairs of eyes, watching my every movement. "Actually, Brandon, I don't hate the family business. I hate the way this family assumed they knew what I was capable of without ever asking. I hate the way you dismissed my work as playing with computers while I was building companies that solve problems you don't even understand." I pulled out my phone and opened the financial app that tracked my business holdings in real time. Walsh Future Holdings currently has contracts with 47 major construction firms, including 3 of your biggest competitors. We provide smart building integration, environmental compliance consulting, and sustainable construction materials that meet new regulatory requirements. I turned the phone screen toward the room, showing revenue figures that made several family members gasp. Last quarter alone, my companies generated $14.2 million in revenue. Walsh Construction, meanwhile, had its worst quarter in 5 years, because you're still trying to build 20th century buildings in a 21st century market. Brandon was staring at my phone screen as if it contained hieroglyphics. $14 million? That's impossible. It keeps my overhead low and my focus sharp. The $1,200 monthly rent I pay allows me to invest my profits in business growth, rather than impressing people who wouldn't recognize success if it had a Harvard MBA. Sean found his voice. "Catherine, even if you have been successful in technology, you don't know anything about construction." "Don't I?" "Sean, what's the current status of the Millennium Park development project?" He looked confused. We're waiting for environmental clearance." "You've been waiting for 8 months because Walsh Construction doesn't have certified environmental compliance expertise. My company could have handled that clearance in 6 weeks." I turned to Michael. "Michael, why did you lose the Newton School District contract last month? The bidding was very competitive. You lost because the district required LEED certification and smart energy management systems. 2 things my companies specialize in and Walsh Construction can't provide." I faced Brandon directly. "Brandon, what percentage of your revenue comes from repeat customers versus new client acquisition?" His face flushed. "I don't see why that's relevant. 78% of Walsh Construction's revenue comes from repeat customers, which means you're not growing market share. You're just maintaining relationships built by Grandpa's generation. Meanwhile, my companies acquire new clients at a rate of 35% annually, because we solve problems other firms can't handle." The room had gone quiet again, but this time it was the silence of people trying to process information. And that challenged everything they thought they knew. "Here's what's going to happen," I continued, my voice calm and authoritative. "Walsh Construction is going to modernize. We're going to integrate smart building technologies, expand into sustainable construction, and develop expertise in environmental compliance. We're going to train the existing workforce on new technologies and hire specialists in areas where we lack competency." Brandon's face was cycling through emotions, anger, confusion, and what looked like growing panic. "Catherine, you can't just walk in here and change everything. This company has operated successfully for 40 years. Successfully. I pulled out my tablet and opened Walsh Construction's financial reports, information that was now mine to access as the controlling owner. Your profit margins have declined by 18% over the past 3 years. Your bid success rate is down 23%. Your average project completion time has increased by 14% because you're not using project management technologies that became industry standard 5 years ago. I turned the tablet screen toward the room, showing graphs and charts that painted a clear picture of a company in gradual decline. Walsh Construction isn't failing, but it's slowly becoming irrelevant. Grandpa understood that. He watched competitors win contracts by offering integrated services you couldn't provide. He saw municipalities requiring certifications you didn't have. He knew the family business needed someone who could bridge traditional construction with modern innovation. Uncle Robert, Brandon's father, leaned forward aggressively. Even if everything you're saying is true, you can't expect this family to accept being pushed aside by someone who's been lying to us for years. I wasn't lying, I replied calmly. I was building. When I tried to tell you about my business success, you dismissed it as unrealistic. When I attempted to discuss market trends and new technologies, you called it creative nonsense. So I stopped trying to convince you and started proving it instead. Aunt Mary, who had been silent throughout the entire exchange, finally spoke up. Catherine, honey, this is all very impressive, but construction is a relationship business. These clients trust the Walsh name because of Patrick's reputation and Brandon's connections. How can you maintain those relationships? It was a fair question and I'd been preparing for it. Aunt Mary, you're absolutely right that construction is a relationship business. But relationships based on past performance only last until someone offers better current solutions. I opened another app on my tablet. I've been quietly consulting for 18 of Walsh Construction's current clients through my other companies. They know my work, they trust my expertise, and they've been asking when Walsh Construction would start offering the integrated services I provide elsewhere. Brandon's mouth fell open. You've been consulting for our clients, behind our backs? I've been consulting for companies that need technological solutions Walsh Construction couldn't provide. The fact that 18 of them happen to be your clients isn't because I was targeting your relationships, it's because every major construction firm in New England needs exactly the services I offer. I showed them a list of client names that made several family members gasp in recognition. Meridian Development hired my environmental compliance company for their downtown project. Brookstone Construction uses my smart building integration team for their luxury residential developments. Harbor Point Associates contracts my sustainable materials division for their commercial work. They weren't choosing my companies over Walsh Construction, they were choosing solutions you couldn't offer. Sean looked stunned. Those are some of our biggest clients. Exactly. And now instead of paying external consultants for services Walsh Construction can't provide, they'll have access to everything through one integrated company. It's better for them, and it's better for us. Mom, who had been uncharacteristically quiet throughout the entire confrontation, finally found her voice. Catherine, sweetheart, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest. What is it, Mom? When you've come to family dinners for the past 5 full years, when you've sat quietly while we talked about business success and market challenges, when you let us believe you were struggling with freelance design work, did you resent us? Were you angry? I considered the question carefully before answering. I was disappointed, Mom. Not angry, but disappointed that my own family was so convinced they knew who I was that they never bothered to find out who I actually am. I was disappointed that you assumed struggling meant failing, and that success had to look exactly like Brandon's path to be legitimate. I looked around the room at faces that were still processing the magnitude of what they'd just learned. None. Entity. And I charmed Alice tell. And I know, a Jersey. But mostly I was determined to build something so undeniably successful that when the right moment came, you'd have to acknowledge that your assumptions were wrong. Margaret Chen, who had been quietly observing the family drama, cleared her throat. There are a few more provisions in the will that need to be addressed. Brandon looked up with what might have been hope. More provisions? Patrick Walsh was very specific about succession planning. Brandon, you inherit 15% of Walsh Construction and are guaranteed employment as Vice President of Traditional Operations, reporting to Catherine as CEO. Sean and Michael each inherit 5% shares and retain their current roles with appropriate compensation increases. She continued reading. The remaining family members receive cash bequests ranging from $50,000 to $200,000. $1,000, depending on their relationship to the deceased and their current financial circumstances. So everyone was provided for, but the power structure had been completely inverted. Catherine, Margaret addressed me directly, your grandfather also left specific instructions about your obligations as the new majority owner. You're required to maintain employment for all current Walsh construction workers, honor existing contracts, and provide transition training for family members who choose to remain with the company. I nodded. Those provisions align with my plans anyway. There's one final instruction, Margaret said, pulling out another envelope. Patrick Walsh requested that if Catherine accepts the inheritance, she should read this letter aloud to the family. She handed me the envelope. I opened it, and saw Grandpa's handwriting, more shaky than I remembered, but still distinctly his. Catherine, I read aloud, if you are reading this letter to the family, it means you have accepted the responsibility of leading Walsh Construction into its next phase. I want you to know that I have been quietly watching your business success for the past 2 years, ever since my friend Judge Morrison mentioned that his son's law firm was handling acquisitions for a young entrepreneur who was building something remarkable in the construction technology space. The room was silent, hanging on every word. I had my attorney investigate, and I learned that my creative granddaughter had built a company worth more than most of Walsh Construction's annual revenue. I was proud, ashamed, and impressed all at once. Proud of your accomplishment, ashamed that I had dismissed your potential, and impressed by your determination to succeed without family support. I looked up and saw that several family members were crying, including Mom. I kept your secret because I realized you were proving something important, that success doesn't require anyone else's approval or understanding. You built Walsh Future Holdings while this family ignored your potential, which means you built it through pure determination and skill. Brandon had put his head in his hands. Now I am asking you to use those same qualities to save Walsh Construction. This family business needs your innovation, your vision, and your understanding of where construction is heading. More than that, this family needs to learn what I should have taught them years ago. Never underestimate someone based on limited information. I folded the letter and looked around the room at 22 faces that showed varying degrees of shock, shame, and dawning respect. To the rest of my family, I continued reading. Catherine is now your leader, not because I'm playing favorites, but because she has earned it. If you choose to stay with Walsh Construction, you will have the opportunity to learn from someone who has already proven she can build successful businesses. If you choose to leave, you will receive generous severance packages and my blessing to pursue other opportunities. The letter concluded, Catherine, lead with the same wisdom you showed in building your own success. This family, and this business are now in the hands of the person best qualified to guide them forward. I set the letter down and looked around the room one final time. I want to be very clear about something, I said. I didn't orchestrate Grandpa's decision. I never asked for this inheritance, and I never lobbied for control of Walsh Construction. But now that I have it, I plan to honor his trust by building something that combines the best of traditional construction with the innovations necessary for future success. Brandon finally looked up. Catherine, I have to ask, what happens to me? To my position? My income? My future with the company? Brandon, you're an excellent operations manager with valuable industry relationships and institutional knowledge. Walsh Construction needs that expertise now more than ever. Your position is secure, your income will increase by 25%, and your future is as bright as you choose to make it. He looked genuinely surprised. You're not going to push me out. Why would I push out competent people? Brandon, you understand client relationships, project management, and quality control better than I do. I need that expertise to complement my technology and business development skills. Sean raised his hand tentatively. What about the rest of us? Sean, you've managed complex projects successfully for 8 years. Michael, you've handled legal compliance in an increasingly complicated regulatory environment. Jennifer, you understand the financial systems and cash flow management. These are all critical skills that Walsh Construction needs to keep. I stood up and walked to the whiteboard that hung on the conference room wall, picking up a marker. Here's my vision for the integrated Walsh Construction, I said, drawing a simple organizational chart. Traditional construction operations continue under Brandon's leadership. New technology integration becomes a separate division under my direct management. Environmental compliance and sustainable construction become a third division. Smart building systems and energy management become a fourth division. I drew lines connecting all the divisions, Instead of one construction company that outsources specialized work, we become a construction solutions company that can handle everything from foundation to final smart building commissioning. Uncle Robert leaned forward to study the diagram. That's actually quite comprehensive. It's the model that major construction firms in California and New York have been moving toward for the past 3 years. We're not behind the curve yet, but we will be if we don't act quickly. I returned to my seat and looked around the room at my newly inherited family business team. I'm not going to pretend this transition will be easy. Learning to work together after years of misunderstanding will require patience and good faith from everyone. But I believe we can build something remarkable if we're willing to combine traditional expertise with innovative approaches. Margaret Chen gathered the will documents and prepared to conclude the meeting. Are there any other questions about the inheritance or the succession plans? Mom raised her hand. Catherine, I have a personal question. Go ahead, Mom. When you were sitting at family dinners, listening to us talk about business success and financial achievements, letting us believe you were just getting by, what were you thinking? I considered the question for a moment. Honestly, I was usually thinking about business problems my companies were solving, or new market opportunities I was investigating. But I was also thinking about how different the conversation would be if you knew what I was actually working on. Do you forgive us for not seeing who you really were? Mom, there's nothing to forgive. You made assumptions based on limited information, which is something everyone does. The difference is that now you have complete information, and I'm curious to see how our relationships change going forward. The meeting concluded with logistical discussions about transition timelines, legal document transfers, and the dozens of administrative details involved in changing corporate ownership. Family members gradually left, some stopping to congratulate me, others clearly still processing what they'd learned. Brandon was one of the last to leave. He approached me as I was gathering my things. Catherine, I need to apologize for the way I've treated you over the years. The dismissive comments, the assumptions about your capabilities, the way I never took your opinions seriously. Brandon, you don't need to apologize for treating me the way the entire family treated me. You were following the established pattern. But that doesn't make it right. He looked genuinely remorseful. I've been thinking about all the times you tried to contribute to business conversations and I shut you down because I assumed you didn't understand complex business concepts. You mean like when I suggested Walsh Construction should develop expertise in environmental compliance 3 years ago? He winced. And I said environmental regulations were just government red tape that would eventually be rolled back. Or when I mentioned that smart building technologies were becoming a competitive advantage, and I said they were just expensive gadgets that clients didn't really need. He shook his head. Catherine, how do you want to handle this transition? How do we move forward as business partners after I've been such an ass? I smiled. Brandon, we move forward by focusing on what we can build together rather than what happened in the past. You have skills I need, I have skills you need, and Walsh Construction has more potential for growth now than it's had in 20 years. What do you need from me in the short term? I need you to help me understand current client relationships, ongoing project challenges, and which employees would be most receptive to learning new technologies. I need you to be the bridge between traditional operations and innovative expansion. He nodded slowly. I can do that. And Catherine? Yes, thank you for not firing me. I know you could have cleaned house and brought in your own team. Brandon, firing competent people to make room for your own hires is something insecure leaders do. I'm not insecure about my abilities, and I'm not threatened by other people's expertise. 6 months later, Walsh Construction had completed its transformation into Walsh Construction Solutions, integrating all 4 divisions under unified leadership. Our revenue had increased by 43%. Our bid success rate had improved by 31%, and we'd won contracts with 3 new municipal clients who specifically sought our integrated technology services. More importantly, the family dynamics had shifted fundamentally. Brandon and I had developed an effective working partnership based on complementary skills rather than hierarchical competition. Sean had embraced learning about project management software and was leading our most technologically advanced projects. Michael had become an expert in environmental compliance law and was consulting with other construction firms on regulatory matters. The Sunday dinners at Mom and Dad's house had evolved too. Instead of speculation about other people's business success, We discussed market trends, client challenges, and innovative solutions we were developing. Instead of dismissing ideas that didn't fit traditional models, family members asked questions and offered insights based on their different areas of expertise. Most significantly, conversation had become collaborative rather than competitive. Success was measured by what we could build together rather than how we compared to each other. If you're still watching at this point, drop legacy in the comments so I know who understood the real lesson of this story. The lesson I learned from inheriting Walsh construction wasn't about vindication or proving doubters wrong. It was about the difference between recognition and respect. Recognition is something people give you when you meet their existing expectations. Respect is something you earn by consistently demonstrating competence, even when others can't see or understand what you're building. For years I wanted my family's recognition, their acknowledgement that my career choices were legitimate and my success was real. But what I actually needed was their respect, which required me to build something undeniably valuable, and then lead with the same wisdom I'd used to create it. Grandpa understood something that took me 32 years to learn. Leadership isn't about having the right credentials or following the expected path. Leadership is about seeing opportunities others miss, building solutions others need, and guiding people toward outcomes that benefit everyone. The inheritance wasn't a reward for past achievements. It was an investment in future possibilities, and an invitation to transform assumptions into understanding, competition into collaboration, and individual success into collective prosperity. Tell me about the moment your family finally understood who you really were. Was it through professional success, personal crisis, or something else entirely? How did their perception change when they learned what you'd been quietly building while they weren't paying attention?